龍が如く維新
or just RGG Ishin, was a game that was released exclusively in Japan on the PS4 and PS3 back in early 2014. The game came out after Yakuza 5 and before Yakuza 0. It was then remade exactly 9 years later as Like a Dragon Ishin in the West, or RGG Ishin Kiwami in Asian regions. The remake was released after Lost Judgment, although I guess it's more accurate to say after Lost Judgment, the Kaito files, and then was released before Like a Dragon Gaiden, which is coming out at some point
November 2023.
In this video, I'll be talking about both versions of Ishin, and that's because I've actually got an entire video dedicated to the remake, which explains the history and context of the remake and the original, as well as documenting almost all of the changes between them. But with this video, I'll expand on some things mentioned in that one. For the sake of this video, the original refers to RGG Ishin, and the remake, or Ishin Kiwami, or whatever, refers to Like a Dragon Ishin. In the original Ishin, the game was the first to feature different fighting styles in the same way that other games in the series had done them. As I mentioned in my video on RGG Kenzan, it was actually the first, but with Ishin, each fighting style had its own unique skill tree you had to invest into, as well as them all having different properties that are more than just them being different weapons. These 4 fighting styles included an unarmed style, a sword style, a gun style, and then a sword gun style. You could equip different swords and guns and whatever for those 3 other styles, and then the unarmed style could also equip spears and cannons as well. Ishin was the first to do a fair few things, which is why I categorize it as the second part of the second revolution, alongside its predecessor Yakuza 5. The biggest thing was this was the first PS4 game of the series, and the graphical improvement is quite noticeable, but not like mind-blowing. This was also the first of the proper 3D games to let you save anywhere you wanted, with the actual first game being Kuroyo 2 on the PSP, but it's not exactly like other games in the series. Kuroyo 1 was also the first game to have map as its own designated button, but of the proper games, Ishin was the first one. But then this was the first game to have an equipment inventory, meaning that your swords, guns, armor pieces, and so on didn't consume space in your main item inventory. You can get a lot of inventory space in Ishin, but it's still a welcome addition because you can also get a lot of pieces of equipment. Then this was also the first game to let you sprint freely outside of combat. Other games like Kuroyo 1 and 2, for example, allowed you to run around in combat by holding X, but Ishin lets you hold down X whenever you wanted outside of combat so that you can move around a lot faster. Every game after that then also had a sprint button, with it behaving the same way up until Judgment and onwards, where it became a toggle. Then finally, Ishin was the first Yakuza game to be released on the PS4. However, unlike Kenzan releasing on just PS3 and not PS2, Ishin also released on the PS3 at the same time. PS3 port was doo-doo dog shit, running at 2p and negative 12 FPS, but whatever, it was still good that it happened because I'm sure back in 2014 not everyone in Japan had a PS4. But then ironically, the remake also released on PS4 in 2023. It wasn't just PS4, with it also releasing on PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, and PC. But it makes me giggle every time to think that there are probably many people in Japan in particular who bought the original game on PS4, and then when the remake came out, probably bought it on PS4 as well, meaning that they just bought the exact same game twice. Because yes, after playing it more and more, I have realized that for all intents and purposes, it's just the exact same game again, only with some balance changes that are good, and then some changes that are kind of bad. To expand on that video of mine, I'd like to say that I said the brawler style was still pretty good and the katana style sucked dick. I will be honest in saying that I still kind of think that, but for the battle dungeon in particular, they made it so that the only viable weapons are ones that can break armor, and literally everything else is worthless. Enemies also have 1 million more health in the battle dungeon in the remake, but at the same time, the weapons were massively buffed. I guess they do say Kiwami means extreme because some of the best swords in the original Ishin only had a max of like 200 attack or something. Then in quite an extreme contrast, some of the best swords in Ishin Kiwami have over 1000 attack. When I made my video, I didn't really have any of those swords, so I then realized later that even though the katana style sucks so much balls that it never hits anything, at the very least, you don't need to hit many times on regular enemies for them to die. Another difference that I'm pretty sure is a remake thing is that for whatever reason, a lot of the time when you shoot enemies with the gun style, they'll get enraged. This was probably done to further nerf the gun style from the original because it was more broken than Smash Bros. Brawl Meta Knight, but weirdly, it doesn't hurt the style that much because the enemies spend too much time doing a little animation, meaning you have more time to shoot them. Another thing with the gun style that I think people may not be too aware of is that when bosses do their stupid trooper card attacks that make them invincible, such as one where they do the big Kamehameha, you can actually shoot them with a gun and they still take damage. A small thing, but yeah, you just step out of the way and shoot them. Easy peasy. Speaking of trooper cards, they ended up being significantly stupider than I initially thought. And yes, if you haven't guessed by the background music, the joke is that they're Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But anyway, Sega and RGG Studio famously said, well, if you don't like it, you don't have to use it, but they neglected to mention that every time you get a health upgrade from your skill trees, your HP goes up by like 1 HP. This was because your health was balanced around the trooper cards, as each card gives you more health. So if you equip none, you'll have no health, which you kinda need. A strat you can do if you don't want to use the cards but like having health is that you equip a bunch of cards into loadouts you won't use, and only equip one that has no cards in it, meaning that you don't have to see the dumb cards but still get the health buffs. Then another thing I was unaware of when making my video is that you you can do stuff like combining the black hole ability with Ichiban's super attack buff thingy and send everyone to the Shadow Realm. I also didn't realize when making my initial video just how bloody grindy the game would have been. Not necessarily just for completionists too, as every Yakuza game is a pain in the ass for completionists and they never get anything for it besides a stupid trophy that no one cares about for more than 10 seconds, because who the hell is going to care about all the platinum trophies I've ever gotten, which I have a few. The answer is everyone, obviously. Look at how amazing of a gamer I am. The blacksmith has a problem of charging you $10 gazillion for every sword you make, as opposed to the first game where it was all significantly cheaper. But at the very least, it definitely felt like leveling up was faster than the original. It's super slow in both, but I did manage to get all the abilities that I unlocked in the original and then some more on top of it, despite playing for roughly the same amount of time. Although this one might be just because I knew what I was doing better in the remake than the original, I'm not sure. But then here comes the final thing. Many people wanted this game to be localized. You can even go back to old YouTube videos from before even Zero came out saying that Ishin and Yakuza 5 needed localizations. But now that it's out, like a month passed before everyone just stopped talking about the game. Obviously, it's because a lot of people had beaten it and moved on to other games like Resident Evil 4 Remake, Tears of the Kingdom, or more recently, Final Fantasy 16, all of which are incredibly based games. But the actual thing I think was the biggest problem with this game's life is actually two different things. For one, it was announced at the same time as two other games, with those two being brand new things that no one's experienced yet. But Ishin Kiwami released this year, meaning that a lot of attention is going more towards the expectations people have for Gaiden. But then the other problem with the Ishin remake is that it was a remake in big fat quotation marks because it barely remade shit. It was pretty much the exact same game as the original, with the only new features being some new actors and a shitty Yu-Gi-Oh ripoff thing that, I'll be honest, I've only ever seen like 3 people say they like. That's why as well Kiwami and Kiwami 2 are far more significant games in the series compared to Ishin Kiwami, because they weren't just the PS2 games with some slightly better visuals. Instead, they were completely different games that provided a completely different experience. Remember how I talked about Japanese people who would have bought the original Ishin and Ishin Kiwami both on their PS4? Well, if the game was any different, they wouldn't have felt mugged off compared to if they played Yakuza 2 on the PS2 and then Kiwami 2 on their PS4. Ishin still is a very good game, and I wasn't expecting to rack up the same amount of time in the remake as I did in the original, but it was because I was still having fun. With that being said though, they could have at least tried to do something a bit more different than what they actually did. But anyway, if you would like to learn more about the remake, you can check the video that I already made that I worked my ass off on, which I'll link in the cards in the top right, the description, and at the end of the video. Now then, I hope you look forward to the next video about Yakuza 0, which wasn't a revolution like 5 and Ishin, but instead a resurgence for the Yakuza series.